Hello all, I am Ryan Linton, the Program Assistant for 4-H, Family Consumer Sciences, and Agricultural and Natural Resources here at the Spencer County Extension Office. Today, we are learning all about soil texture analysis. So this method comes from Ted Samus at New Mexico State University. We use this method to see the different layers of soil, estimate the percentage amounts of clay, silt, and sand in our soil, and also to determine the texture. So, let's get started. So the first thing you're going to need is a jar or a container that is clear so you can see through it and that you're able to mark. Next, we're going to need enough dirt to fill up our container. So I've got this dirt, I laid it out so it could dry out because it was raining when I collected it. We're also going to need just a little bit of soap, and this is going to help break up our soil so that we can actually get it separated and it can form layers. We're going to need water, and we're also going to need a marker that will mark on our container for us. So once we have those things together, we can begin our experiment. So our first step is going to be to fill our jar with our soil. So you want it to be about halfway full of your dirt too. So once you have your dirt in your jar, the next step you're going to need to do is just add a little bit of water, enough to turn it into a little bit of a muddier substance. That way it can be kind of muddied up and tamped down. All right, and we're going to do that, tamp it down to where it really gets about half full, and then make our first mark. We're going to make a mark on my jar where that level is at and label it first mark. Your next step is to add a teaspoon of soap to your jar. Add a little bit there. And again, that is going to help break up those clumps of dirt that otherwise would stay together if you just added water. You can also use Calcon. That's what this experiment first recommends. And once you've done that, you're going to fill it the rest of the way up with water, leaving a little bit of headspace, and then seal your jar. Make sure that you seal it very tight because this next part can get messy. What you're going to do is you're going to take your jar and you're going to shake it up until all of the dirt and soil in your jar is fully mixed up in your water. So once you have added your water and soap and shaken up your jar so all of your dirt is fully combined with your water, you're going to let that sit for about 40 seconds. And as you do this, watch when it happens, you'll be able to already see the layers of soil separate. So that first one that you're going to really see form after 40 seconds is your layer of sand. Okay, so that is the most heavy and the densest of our soil particles. So it is going to sink to the bottom first. All right, so after 40 seconds, and I'm still waiting on the clock here, we will take our marker again, and we are going to measure that line that we see form after 40 seconds, because again, that will be our sand layer. So once all that sand has settled to the bottom, we're going to take a mark. And if you get real close and watch it, you'll be able to see all of our layers of soil begin to separate. You'll see that motion begin to form between the layers of silt and clay rising up and sand falling down to the bottom. So it's been about 40 seconds now. I'm going to take my marker and mark on the same side of my jar, right here, where that sand layer is currently resting. And that'll be our second mark. So the next step is simply just to wait. Once you've made your second mark, which is your sand layer, you're going to wait about 6 hours for that soil to further separate and form layers. And you're going to come back and make your third mark.
Good morning. So we have waited at least 6 hours. And of course, the longer you wait on your soil layers to separate, the more that you're going to see those distinct layers form. However, now that we've waited at least 6 hours, we can make our third and final mark. So what we're going to do here, and I've already made this mark for us today, is we're going to find the color difference between our silt and our clay layers. So our silt's going to be a little bit of a grainier dark brown, where our clay is going to be a more compacted light brown. And you're going to take that mark there. That's our middle mark, but it's our third one that we're going to make, okay? And you may have noticed that I have readjusted that first mark. Sometimes when you are doing this, what will happen is once the soil all settles, it'll actually be higher than your first mark. So it's totally okay to readjust that first mark based off of how tall your soil is once everything has settled down, okay? But we also can see that this water is not 100% clear yet, which means there's still some clay that has yet to settle on that top surface. That's going to be important here in a second when we get to doing some math. All right, but we have now made our third mark. So let's get some math going. So to start off with our math, we have to get some measurements. The first one that we're going to get is for our sand portion of our soil. So to do that, all we're going to do is get a ruler or a tape measure, whatever you have nearby, and you're going to simply measure from the bottom of the jar to that bottom mark, which is our sand portion of our soil. So if we measure that here, we see that we have 1.25 inches that make up our sand layers. So take a note of that. The second measure that we are going to take is from our sand mark, that bottom mark, to the middle mark. And that's going to be the silt portion of our soil. And then we have about an inch there. So we got an inch between our bottom and our middle mark. And the next measurement that we're going to take is not from our middle to our top mark, but it is instead from the bottom of our jar to the very top of the soil we have. And we see there we have got about 3.25 inches of soil in our jar. So the first step in figuring out our percentages is taking the measurements we just took and dividing them with each other. So the first one we're going to do is our sand. We're going to take that 1.25 inches of our sand measured and divide it by the total amount of dirt in the jar, which is 3.25 inches. So 1.25 divided by 3.25. And we're going to get 0.385. To make that into a percentage from a decimal, we take that decimal point at the beginning of the number and move it over 2 number spaces. So our percentage then would be 38.5%. So 38.5% of the dirt in this jar is made up of sand. Next, we're going to do the same thing with silt. So it was only 1 inch. So we're going to do 1 divided by 3.25, and we get 30 or 0.31, which when we make a decimal into a percentage, we are going to turn that into 31%. So 31% of the dirt in this jar is made up of silt. And then to get our clay portion, we're not going to divide like we did with sand and silt. Instead, we're going to subtract from 100. We do this because, as we can see here, the water at the top of the jar is not 100% clear, which means there's still some clay that has yet to settle. It's the last particle that actually will settle into its layer because it is so small and so light. So we have to subtract from 100 instead of using that measurement. So we're going to take 100 minus our 2 percentages, which is 38.5 and 31, and we get 30.5% of the dirt in this jar is made up of clay. So we have gotten our percentage of sand, silt, and clay in our jar, but the story's not over yet. We still have to convert these numbers we have from volume to weight, because in the soil science field, we use the percentages based off of weight to determine its placement on things like the soil triangle, which we're going to see here in a second. So we will take our decimal or our percentage of our sand, which is that 38.5, and multiply it by 1.19, and we're going to get 0.46 or 46%. Do the same thing with our silt. At 31%, we're going to multiply by 0.87, and we're going to get 27 or 0.27. And then with our clay, same deal. We're going to do 0.305 times 0.94, and that's going to give us 0.29 or 29%. And then we're going to take those numbers, our 46, our 27, and our 29, and go over to our soil triangle, which looks like this. So those numbers that we just got, our 46, our 27, and our 29, we are going to find them on each corresponding side of our triangle. Okay, so our percent sand here, our sand number was 46. So we're going to go along the bottom of our sand axis here and get to where it's about 46 and make a mark. We're going to go to our silt side right here, and we're going to go to 27, which is going to be right about here, this purple line, and make a mark. And then our clay, we're going to do the same thing at about 29 right here. Then we're going to follow along these sides until they all connect in this middle. And that will tell us what kind of soil that we have here at the extension office. So the soil that I dug up was what we consider a sandy clay loam. It's right there in between clay loam, and sandy lake loam, but it falls more heavily to the sandy side. So today we have learned how to do our own soil texture analysis, and we've decided or determined that the soil we have here at the extension office is sandy clay loam, which an example of that is dried out is right here. So you can see the different soil particle sizes, our sand, plenty of our clay and silt there as well. But why is this important? We can learn all these things, but it's also important to understand and know why we need to know them in the first place. So, to figure this out, we're going to cut over to our ag agent, Bryce Roberts.
Now that Ryan has talked about the different types of the particles in our soil, the texture, which is the sand, silt, and clay, which we've got examples here, it's very important to know those different types or the percentages of each of those in our soils. One, to help grow our crops better, landscape plants like our trees, and our vegetable garden. So if we have a lot of high sand in our soil, the soil will drain very well, but it won't hold on to the nutrients. Now, if we have a lot of clay, that will hold onto the water and to the nutrients, but you could have drainage issues later on. And I've got an activity I'm going to tell you about at the very end. So knowing your texture will determine the appropriate amendments, like the types of fertilizers that you might need, different types of amendments, such as organic matter. If you have a lot of sand, you want to add organic matter to the soil. If you have a lot of clay, you can actually add more sand to it and aerate the soil to break it up a little bit more. So at the very end, as we're talking about this really makes a big difference on how well our plants and trees and shrubs will grow. A lot of our trees, such as our white pines, they do not like a lot of clay in our soil. So we have to sometimes amend the soils to to help those pine trees out. That's just one example. Now, a very quick activity to see how much clay that you've got in your soil. We've already done the jar test that Ryan has done, but a very simple way to see how well our soil will drain is to go dig a hole out in your yard or in your garden about a foot deep. It doesn't have to be very wide or anything like that, just a small bucket-sized hole. Fill it with water. Let sit for about a half hour or so. If you come back and the water's gone, you've got quite a bit of sand and silt in your soil, not much clay, which is pretty good. Now, if you come back and, half hour later and there's water still in that hole, you've got a lot of clay. So that means you will have to add some other organic materials. I hope through this process with Ryan and myself that you've learned quite a bit about the different types and textures of soil.
Thank you, Bryce. Thank you guys as well for spending the time with us today to learn all about soil science and ways that you can test your own soil. I hope you've learned something new today, and if you liked this stuff, please let us know. And if you have any questions about it, by all means, feel free to stop by and see us at the Extension office. Thank you much. Have a great day.